respect to today's conversation, which is something that a lot of us are extremely, we all have very strong emotions around this topic. One of the first things that Vikas and I talked about when I reached out to him uh, with respect to this conversation is that uh, people have strong reactions when it comes to the question of AI and when it comes to the question of the role of AI and the role of AI vis-a-vis craft and artisanship. Before I hand over to Kevin, I think there's just one reference that I would love to bring up. It's something that came up in a conversation with one of our house members, Leila Al-Hamad, a few years back. We were talking about artificial intelligence, and Leila rightfully brought up the etymology of the word artificial itself. So artifice, as we all know, is today used in the sense of deception or trickery. It has a kind of pejorative connotation. Someone who uses or employs artifice is out to deceive you. In the 1530s, however, it meant workmanship. It meant the making of something by craft or skill. The artificer was a person of extraordinary skill. So in Middle French, artifice meant skill or cunning. In Latin, artificum meant a profession, trade, employment, craft, and so on. And one of the earliest recorded use of the word artificial actually pertained to a sunrise, that is, an artificial day, a day that was from sunrise to sunset as opposed to the full 24 hours. So at that point, the word artificial meant anything made by man as opposed to something natural. And the word has transitioned. There's been lots of slippages and moves of the word from meaning something made by human to today largely meaning something made by machine. And that's an interesting context for us to keep in mind as we explore also the history of the relationship between man and machine in today's conversation. Over to Kevin now, who will set the context for today's conversation and introduce our speakers.
Thanks very much, Kamya. That's a really interesting perspective in deep time for something which seems so new. So this conversation responds particularly to one we had 2 years ago on a craft response to ChatGPT, which already is 2 years old. It seems hard to believe, but we were particularly interested in the phenomenon of prompt crafting, how there was a sense of there being skill, even though it looked like a lot of knowledge was being outsourced, that there was still some skill involved in how to trigger that knowledge, how to manipulate it. Another point that came up was particularly in terms of writing, so we focused particularly on the impact of Craft GPT on writing, that having writing generated by a machine, while it's possible to prompt it, uh, it means that the act of putting your thoughts into words is circumvented. And we considered the way in which writing, the labor of writing, was actually constitutive of thought. And so this could have an impact on how we actually think. And there was much reference to the works of Ivan Illich, his book Tools of Conviviality, and the emphasis on autonomy as being part of a craft ethic, having control of your tools and so on as being important. But overall, I think what we saw is that the possibility of ChatGPT making way for artisanal writing, so writing made by a human, by hand, whereas previously writing was seen as a purely abstract kind of practice. But now that there is a artificially generated writing, then what is we would normally take for granted as keyboard craft is something which would be seen as being special and something we give time to. Moving to coding, we're moving to a more abstract process because really it's talking to machines, finding the language to get machines to do various things. So in that sense, it seems a slightly different matter, but it has been something that's come up in craft discourse before, particularly Richard Sennett, his book The Craftsman, was notable for including coders within its ambit, particularly Linux coders, and the way in which Linux coders attended to bugs, and that there was a sort of a camaraderie over finding ways of solving those bugs. And just a quote from Sennett: this is more than 20 years ago, the experimental rhythm of problem solving and problem finding makes the ancient potter and the modern programmer members of the same tribe. So this was quite a bold statement at the time, and hasn't really proceeded much until we come to today, where we're looking at the rise of what has been named artisanal programming. It's estimated that around 80% of programmers now use AI tools to do their work. So rather than writing out laboriously code by hand, to do what's called vibe coding, which is to prompt uh, various apps to create the code for yourself. And there has been a sort of moral concern about this in terms of what some people call spaghetti coding, coding that doesn't have a human overview of it. Um, and that's something which is very interesting, and but also needs to be measured against the kind of practical facility of the complexity of code and the need to have tools to be able to deal with that. But the other issue is around authorship, because the handmade generally is something which involves a guarantee that there is a person you know who made something. So uh, knowing the maker often enables you to have more trust in the product, uh, that it can be something which lasts over time and it functions well. That made by human is something which gives it that kind of accountability. And the question is whether in software coding that matters, to know the name of the programmer, whether that's something which is particularly relevant in how we entrust these programs with the information and increasingly with our lives. So we've got a lot of really interesting questions to consider, and to start us off, two very interesting and very different perspectives. We've got Daisy Watt, who's been a weaver for 10 years and a coder for 3 years, is part of Refugees Code Melbourne and the Loom Rescue Group that we've covered in Garland magazine. And Vikas Guru, who's the head of Airbase and has worked at Twitter and been very important in terms of understanding, in terms of his writing, what's happening with AI. So over to you, Daisy, if you'd like to start off by telling us a bit about yourself and your perspective on coding.
Hello. Yeah, I guess I think my perspective has been heavily shaped by my origin to coding, and I was very lucky to be a kid that had access to music and dance and other types of creative expression, and those things themselves are innately, structured and patterned and coded and sequenced. Um, but I also, because of that, I then was fascinated with textiles and went and studied at one of the most incredible programs, which unfortunately is not there anymore. But I had access to just deep material learning and development and time, and exposure to the complexities of those materiality and these kind of mundane things. So many looms, simple looms, complex looms, and then later went on to teach for a couple of years in weaving and the jacquard at RMIT, and joking with students that we were programming our looms without really understanding the weight that came behind the truth of those like lighthearted comments. And then come the COVID-19 lockdowns and kind of the time in beforehand, we were already seeing some kind of rapid contraction of the fashion and textile industry, at least here in Australia, and compounded with the lockdowns. We lost a lot of this really rich creative community and a lot of, deep quality practices and like brands, companies, places, and all that things. Um, and then as a result, like my work as well contracted, and I needed to kind of keep a roof over my head. But I wanted to make use of this idle time, right? Like we were in the world's longest lockdown in Victoria. And so I wanted to be productive with that time and use it in a way that was going to, I don't know, could do something with. Yeah. And so I kind of instead of fearing technology, this thing that I wanted to kind of blame for the reason why a lot of my work was vanishing, I just kind of wanted to understand it more and see how much truth there was to these relationships that I understood from a kind of conceptual arts practice lens in the mechanic of the machine with the computer. And that kind of mythical black box of it all. And I think also compounded what influenced that as well is I had lots of friends that were impacted by the robo-debt here in Australia, which was like faulty automated systems, which literally cost people their lives, as well as the criticisms around the faulty and biased facial recognition tech going on in the UK and stuff like that. So I kind of felt strongly that we needed people in that human space to help like shepherd this. Like at least these systems that have such increasingly power and over humans in a way that's going to like benefit them and empower them instead of creating harm. I learned a bit of code and taught myself a bit of code, and then managed to do a little online course. And it was, I just never kind of imagined I would be in this space. I kind of found work in that space. Didn't think I would get a job as a weaver who'd done some online stuff and hadn't actually had, 4 or 5 years of computer science lingo behind me. But then suddenly I found myself, working on one of the most important pieces of infrastructure in the country, organ transplant technology and hospital systems and things like that. And that was just me, a weaver who played with strings and fabric and pattern for a living for the majority of my life. Now I was sitting in this chair maintaining, critical systems. But also I think it's important to note, like, this all happened right before my journey into code, I guess, and getting my hands dirty was just before AI and ChatGPT surfaced. And in hindsight, like, I'm grateful of that because, I had to kind of put in hard hours of conceptual understanding and like troubleshooting, researching, hours slamming my head against the keyboard, trying to figure out what on earth I was even doing. But that time and that labor gave me deep respect about the true kind of respect of coding in, the same way that weaving does with cloth. So I guess like, I feel like weaving's trained my mind for coding, patience, patterns, problem solving, and it keeps reminding me that technology isn't neutral. I think it's important to be about care, responsibility, and what type of systems we're choosing to build. And I, holding on to that kind of like skill and accountability in the face of automation. That's kind of like my entry point into all of coding and stuff like that.
Okay, thank you so much, Daisy. And I certainly recommend people have a look at the Rescue Loom project, and it's been covered so much in the media. It's been something which has shown the benefit of coding in terms of reviving a craft, particularly with the use of this jacquard loom. Vikas, I invite you now to join us and to share with us about your experience and maybe do a little demonstration of AI coding.
Yeah, thanks a lot. I'm really glad to be here. I feel like this is something I've been thinking about for almost a couple of years now. I didn't quite know where I should talk about it, but somehow this is a delightful surprise that I guess this is the place I should talk about it. Also, it's great to meet you, Daisy. Weaving, as I'm sure you know, is the original form of programming. The punch card comes from the jacquard loom, and that's what the big mainframe computers were programmed with. So a little bit about me. I've been writing code for about 25 years now. As Kevin mentioned, I'm a practitioner, not a researcher or academic. And what I thought I'll do today is just get some definitions and how I think about craft and software and what the experience, my day-to-day experience before AI and after feels like. And then also I can show a quick demo of literally how I use it every day. So I'll start with, what is craft in software? To me, software is a form of mass-produced industrial design. That is the closest analog I can think of, because so it's more like like an espresso machine, right? Because software is written for the consumption of many users. Of course, it costs nothing to make copies of software, but it is still meant for, it's not like a handmade mug that is made for one person. It is a mass-produced artifact. And so when I think about craft, I think in analogy with things like what is a beautiful espresso machine and what is a beautiful oven or something like that. In that sense, I think there is craft on the outside and there is craft on the inside. By craft on the outside, I mean, as a user of a machine, what do you enjoy? The detailing, the MacBook, the finish of the aluminum, or the pressure of the steam in an espresso machine, or things like that. That is something that a user of a machine can appreciate. Similarly, in software, I think those of us of a certain age can fondly remember things like Winamp, spending hours and hours. There is something about that software that really worked, and for that time. And I'm sure, I know a lot of software sucks, but I'm sure there is one or two things that we all actually enjoy using. So that's craft on the outside. That's the craft that is relevant to the user of the software. And in some ways, that's the most important thing, because your code can be beautiful and your software can be ugly. And ultimately, your software has to be good for the user. It has a purpose. It's not merely a work of, it's not an aesthetic experience. It has utility. But there is also craft on the inside, just like that quote about the potter and programming being like any of these crafts. There are things like how nicely your code is formatted, and programmers do have extremely heated debates about, should I use 4 spaces to indent, or should I use 8 spaces? Should I use tabs or spaces? And these are signals I would use when interviewing someone. If I watch someone coding, I can pick up on things, which I'm sure it's true for all craft. Like I'm sure a master woodworker can tell by the way someone holds a saw that they don't know what they're doing. But a lot of this craft it's only for the consumption of other people engaged in the same craft. We can appreciate the aesthetics of code. And sometimes that also, you can have really elegant code that results in the ultimate product being much more delightful to use. Right? So what is the experience of building software before AI? There's a great quote from one of the classic books on software management, which goes something like, both the joy and the pain of programming come from the same source, which is, unlike any other craft, like the sculptor or the painter or the pottery maker, the programmer is working with pure thought stuff. The medium is infinitely malleable in a way that no other medium is. And that gives you a lot of freedom, but it also makes possible certain kind of mistakes that you would never make in any other craft. I like to think of it as, if you were designing a machine, you would never, in your drawings, draw something like a shaft that goes through the spokes of a wheel. But programmers do it all the time. It's only when we run the machine that we discover that, oh, this makes absolutely no sense. But the thing that's common to other crafts is the same loop of imagination and execution. I have some vision in my mind. Maybe it's an app, maybe it's a web-based app. And I can imagine a screen, and I have buttons, and if I click this, that should happen. And then comes the execution, which is actually laboriously writing the code and dealing with all the frustrations of it doesn't work. And then you just repeat that loop over and over again. And some of the frustration of programming comes from the inherent difficulty of it in the imagination of it, because there are an infinite number of apps you can build. There are infinite purposes that are possible. So which one do I want to build? And even in the little things, there are decisions to be made. Should I put a button here? Should I put 3 buttons here? But some of the frustration comes from, no programmer is working alone. We are essentially working with components and pieces built by other people, and you have to put it all together. And because those things are built by other people, they are unreliable to various degrees, and far more unreliable than like regular engineering. As a mechanical engineer, I'm guessing you can order nuts and bolts of certain specifications and they will come and they will be like that. But software is not like that. Sometimes one out of those nuts will just melt when you put it together. But that execution, it also can lead you into that flow state. This is the image of the hoodie wearing programmer in their basement, energy drinks, hasn't showered, and all of that is true. And it's also enjoyable to be in that state. Now, what does it feel like to me to write code with AI? Most of the execution part of it can be delegated away. All the frustrating parts, so much of it can just be delegated to the AI. If I can imagine something, I still have to do the imagining. I still have to imagine individual pieces of it in detail. It's not just about having an idea that, I'll make a dating app. I need to know, well, how is it going to be different from all the 50 other dating apps? But the execution can be delegated. And this means that as a builder of software, you only have to wrestle with the hard problems, such as if I'm building a music player, should it have an equalizer feature? Maybe, maybe not. I'm not enough of a music nerd to know why Winamp had a equalizer feature, but Spotify doesn't. Maybe for a certain audience, you don't need that kind of advanced feature. And if it does have, how many presets should it have? So there are tons of these choices you have to make. And that's craft too. But because the execution can be delegated away, you can pretty much focus only on this part. Now, what do we gain from this? I think I gain a lot because I've been doing this for 25 years. I don't just doing the same frustrating thing over and over again does not bring me any joy. It does not enhance my understanding. When I was learning programming, every little thing, it teaches you something. But once you've done it for a while, there's nothing to be gained. It also opens up the opportunity to actually build more. I'm finishing more side projects than I ever did. I did a little thing in the house where I hooked up a tiny computer to a tiny receipt printer, and I made what I call a telex machine so that I can send my wife telegrams during the day and it prints. This is the kind of thing that it involved a lot of annoying, find that printer driver and understand the communication between this and the printer and the protocols. Can I do it? Yes, with a lot of time. But doing it with AI saved me so much time, and I got to my actual end result much quickly. And what will be lost? I think one of the things that's going to be lost is there's a lot of status, a membership in a priesthood you get by having all this esoteric knowledge. If you've been doing it for 15 years, 10 years, then you get to be that person in the team that is like, hey, anybody has a question, you should go ask that person. And the AI has become a great equalizer. I have a lot of esoteric knowledge like that is now accessible to anyone. Before, the only way to get that was to struggle through it for years and years and accumulate all that knowledge. And this causes some anxiety, I feel, in certain programmers. Is they've lost one of the pillars of their ego. It is argued sometimes that this hinders learning, that everyone's writing code and nobody's going through the struggle. I mean, this is in some ways the same thing of, when I was a kid, We had to walk uphill in the snow to go to school, and now look at kids these days. I don't think that's true. It's not the tool's fault, right? Like you can give AI like the instruction manual to your microwave and ask it questions and use it in that way, which is good. You can also give it the text of Anna Karenina and ask it to summarize it for you, which is bad. But it's up to us to use it wisely. And I think if you have intellectual curiosity, this is the best time to learn to be a programmer, because you don't have to go to a library. You don't have to pull up printed books and spend hours and hours Googling to understand something. You can just directly ask it. So that's all I had. Now I will show a quick demo of everything I'm talking about. I'm not going to do a live demo in the sense of trying to generate something right now, because by the law of all demos, it will most certainly fail. So I will just show what I've done this morning. Okay, I think everyone can see the editor with a bunch of text. Can everyone see?
Yes, we can see.
So this is an example of a lot of demos tend to focus on, I just wrote a prompt and I built an entire app, right? Like I cloned Airbnb in a weekend or something like that. I think that's flashy demo stuff. That's not how you can't, if you're working, if you're building a company, you're building a product, you're not just doing that one shot, did it in a weekend thing. You're iterating and you're adding little things to the code base over a long period of time. So I'm going to show an example of what that looks like, where it's like imagine this to be a tiny part of a much bigger piece of software. And the task I have here is, and this is the prompt I wrote. So imagine there's like a banking app or something like that, and there's the input field where I type in an amount in rupees. And for those of you who don't know, India has its own number division system where 100,000 is called a lakh and 100 lakhs is called a crore. And so let's say I want a input box where I type in a number and it automatically converts that into words like this, 1 crore 56 lakhs, blah, blah, blah. And I'm going to use this as part of my bigger app. So this is what I did. I gave it to Claude Code, which is one of the AI coding assistants. And I will show you what it generated. So this is one shot. I literally just wrote that prompt, and this is what came out. Now I can type something. And there you go. Again, like this is not a full app. This is a piece of an app. But in a real app, I would take this code and put it along with everything else. And I just want to show quickly the code it generated, which is right here. So it wrote all of this code. Now, is this the most elegant code? Before AI, I could have said, actually, no. If I was reviewing this code in a company and someone submitted this, I might say, hey, you know what? This is a little too verbose. You can actually make it smaller, and but is it correct? Yes. Is it clean and easy to understand? Also, yes. And so now I don't care. And also, could I do this by myself? Absolutely. It would take me about 45 minutes to write all of this code. Would I gain anything by doing it by hand? No. I know I can do this. I will learn nothing by doing this. This is tedium. And my goal is not to write this kind of code over and over again. My goal is to build whatever software I want to build. So with that, I will stop.
Thank you so much, Vikas. That was really terrific, really, really interesting, and so many things to think over. I I invite anyone who has a question or a comment who would like to start off the conversation, to start thinking about the particular value of craft in this transition from coding towards artificial intelligence, whether there's anything really significant in what, say, Vikas was talking about with the number of spaces in an indent that might be some internal value that coders have. Kamya, will you
I'm happy to go first.
please?
Wait, if it's okay. Yeah. Thank you so much, Daisy and Vikas. Lots of fun listening to both of you. I think one thing that got me thinking as I was listening to the two of you is I think when makers or researchers make a case for the handmade today, I think one of the cases that we do make is that there's value, there's a sort of meditative value in the act of doing. And Daisy, perhaps as someone who's been both a weaver and a coder, you can speak especially to this, that there's this something about the bodily, the sensorial engagement that comes with making an object. And that act has value in and of itself, regardless of the outcomes that may result from it. Now, I think Vikas, you made quite a compelling case that this is perhaps not so much the case for a lot of the nuts and bolts of code, that it's the at the level of design, at the level of envisioning a product that a lot of the fun lies. So I was wondering if the two of you could speak a little bit more to this. Do you perceive a distinction, or do you think that there's something more going on here?
Uh, so I agree with you. There is inherent value. There are times, so when I want to learn something, there are like exercises I want to do only in order to learn. I still turn off all AI and write code by hand, precisely because of that reason, because it is purely enjoyment for me. And because the purpose of it is for me to learn, I'm not building utilitarian anything for anybody else to use. It's purely for my, or sometimes I will write it and put it on a blog. It's meant as a teaching aid. It's more like writing a paper or a textbook where there is code. So I absolutely agree that there is value in it. But in a commercial context, in like an industrial context, there is value in it, but that's not the most important one.
I think, like, I guess we come from different spaces, and Vikas has a wealth of experience as a prolific, 25 years plus programmer, and me like pushing 3 years. So kind of got a different take, but like similar perspectives into the sense that the convenience that and the ease that comes from removing that friction is so empowering and can empower so many individuals. But like, with my like teacher, the inner teacher in me, I kind of see this parallel between fast fashion and slow fashion and regular coding and AI coding. We like AI generates us kind of like fast fashion quick code that sometimes is associated as being kind of like cheap, and we don't really know what it's made of and whether it will really hold up robustly. But then with the manual coding, it cut closer to more of a slow fashion approach. You understand the deep materiality, you leave a signature, and you're building quality kind of work. But there's kind of this trade-off, right, between, convenience versus craft, and like what cost that convenience comes of. And I think both can coexist for sure, but when we over rely on convenience, we erode kind of knowledge base that kind of makes convenience possible in the first place. And the thing that comes to mind is this calculator analogy. It's like a really good example, and it's about, we don't when I think about like maths, right? We don't hand a calculator to a child and go like, there you go, now you understand mathematics. Instead we ground them in, kind of like number sense, problem solving, arithmetic, and then only after they have that foundation do the calculators become exceptionally useful accelerating tools for complexity. And so I guess like I feel like the same is true for coding to a degree. You know, if we lean entirely on AI generated code tools without the understanding of the underlying structures, I think we risk producing a generation of programmers who can get amazing outputs, but can't actually think in the nitty gritty nuts and bolts. And, you know, just as someone, you know, whoever kind of uses a calculator might stumble over basic fractions in real life, you know, same kind of thing, you know, the convenience becomes the crutch rather than the amplifier. And so I guess the real question is like, you know, isn't whether we use tools, you know, weaving, I guess, has always been about tools, you know, heddles and, you know, all these different parts of machines and stuff like that. But whether we're keeping alive the knowledge underneath, you know, that is, you know, craft knowledge that gives us, you know, resilience, adaptability, you know, the ability to question the tools themselves and continue to reinvent them. That's kind of like the angle. And when you were talking too as well about like, you know, that kind of like handmade embodiment that kind of comes and talking, you know, Vivek is talking about how you enjoy going to code and that kind of disparity between the two, you know, I kind of feel like there's this like illusion that typing code is somewhat immaterial and not real. You know, like nothing's being made until it appears as software functioning perfectly on a screen. But I just think like any craft, it's beginning with the hand. You know, each keystroke is a gesture. The fingertip presses on a key, and that mechanism is a spring that, you know, compresses, and that action produces a pulse of electricity, and that runs through copper, you know, into chips that are etched, you know, in silicon, which is just sand, you know, across transistors built from, you know, earth materials. And those are minerals, you know, refined and assembled into a machine. So, you know, that act seems physical and embodied and has material. The programmer's hand sets, you know, a chain of matter into motion, you know, like shaping signals the way that, yeah, a potter shapes clay or a weaver moves yarn through the loom, I guess. You know, the clay carries the trace of the hand in its form. And I think the code carries it in its perhaps, yeah, syntax and structure. But I guess the medium is different, but the principle feels the same, you know, like the transformation of raw material through human gesture and intention. And even just like how we're meeting today, right? Like we're on a screen, you know, even the pixels on our screens are often seen as not real and like immaterial. But, you know, each tiny pixel is like a cell of crystals and liquid and the, you know, other compounds that are arranged in grid-like patterns, which, you know, we have analogies to that on the loom. You know, when a key's pressed, the chain of signals culminates the screen into kind of, you know, emitting light and color and arranging themselves into patterns. So I think it's kind of this deep material process. I think, yeah, just as cloth reflects interlacing of threads, you know, a display reflects the alignment of countless microscopic structures that are activated by human touch. So like software is then not conjured from nothing. It is the product of hands and machines kind of intertwined. And, you know, like craft practice as, you know, as real as weaving and ceramics, as though, you know, fabric is the light itself, I guess. And the programmer's keystrokes kind of shape not only logic and matter, but they do bind the body with machine and earth materials in some type of intentful way. Like, you know, yeah.
Thanks, Daisy. Trish, were you wanting to come in?
Yeah, sorry. Showing my low tech knowledge, I couldn't find where the raise hand button was here. Anyway, my comment sits somewhere between Vikas and Daisy's kind of positionality there, but reflecting on, you know, as a pattern maker, fashion design pattern maker, first learning how to digitize patterns and thinking, wow, now anyone can do this. Essentially, you still had to have a complete understanding of what it was you were trying to create. And I notice in Vikas's language, he knows exactly what this thing is. So I might want something to function, but really, unless I have that material understanding of the practice, it's really hard to describe. And so, yes, writing the code is one thing, but you know, sort of the process of learning how to ask the right question is perhaps, you know, where there is still the craft knowledge has to still lie in understanding what it is you're trying to create. And that can be probably just as tedious trial and error process as writing lines of code, I suppose. So
Yeah, absolutely. I I have two conflicting thoughts about this. One is I agree with you completely that the more you already know software, like if you have been doing it for a long time already, the better you are at using these tools because of exactly the same thing you've described. You need to have the precise vocabulary, and you need to be able to review the work very quickly and know, is it going down the right path or has it made a complete mess of it? So one part of me says, if someone's learning to program now, I'm like kids these days, do it the way I did it, right? Like sit down, open a textbook, do the exercises on paper. That's the only way. Uh, I very strongly do believe that. But another part of me also says, throughout the history of software, this argument has been made multiple times. So there was a time in the 60s or 70s where you couldn't write any software unless you intimately knew the hardware of the machine that you were working with. You had to know, you had to stand in front of it, and it had these many bits of memory, and how like you needed to know a lot of the physicality of that machine. But over time, we built up these levels of abstraction that people who are learning to code today won't even know half the things Daisy said about the pixels and the transistors. Like you can be a completely productive programmer in industry without ever having heard the word transistor or even know that they exist in your machine, right? Is that necessarily a bad thing? I don't think so, right? So I am conflicted in that way.
I'd just like to reflect on the app on which the Vault, the Knowledge House for Vault that Kamya mentioned, sits, Obsidian. And this is part of a community of developers. It's a very popular one with millions of adherents. And I was in contact recently with one of the developers, Callum Allpass, who's also a PhD in philosophy. Had a similar transition maybe to you, Daisy, in terms of moving into fields. And I think he's with us here, Callum. Yes, you're there. And there's a couple of things that I've learned from Callum. One is what you're talking about, Daisy, with Robodet, and also Vikas with the music equalizer. It's knowing your user and having a relationship with them, which maybe isn't always the case in the big corporations like Microsoft because of the abstraction that exists there. But in a situation like the Obsidian community, people I know for Callum are always asking him with feature requests and also contributing in terms of various releases and so on that he's doing, contributing their own code. So it has that truly strong sense of community you would associate with craft. And I wonder, Callum, if you'd like to share your experience and resonate with what people have been talking about this evening.
Sure, yeah. I think I'd sort of echo a lot of what has been said. I'd agree, so to be clear, so the project I've been working on as part of Obsidian, this plugin that I've been working on, has been written almost entirely by AI. But it's taken a lot of work, a lot of consistent work to get it working and into the state that it's currently in. I wouldn't know how to write the first line of the code myself. So I guess for me, I've felt that benefit of having AI assistance, but I've also felt at the same time some disappointment in not feeling that I have the mastery of the craft of coding or knowing exactly how to how to implement it myself. So I think that tension or that conflict is something that I feel. But yeah, and at the same time, I've learned a lot in working with the AI agents. I've learned a lot about coding and also about I think some skills in interacting with those agents as well. So yeah, I think my sentiment is similar to what has been said.
But I think, Callum, what I learned from you also is that it's as a coder just starting out and creating something which you could never have imagined doing without these tools, that it's not just being captive to one tool, that part of the agency is using various tools like Claude AI and others to check what you're doing. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, I've had I found it helpful to to set off agents against each other to review code and to trying out. And I think part of I guess part of the process of using AI agents is trying to understand where they're coming from, how they might be interpreting what you're saying. So there's, I think there's an interesting kind of process there, and I guess there is some skill in it, even if it's separate to the skill that you might need, or understanding that you might need of the code that is being produced. So it's been an interesting process.
But a very productive one for you.
Absolutely.
But still with this niggling sense that you would like to understand at that more micro level what these lines are doing.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, this is something that I wouldn't have had the time or the knowledge to do myself, and so I'm grateful for that. But yes, I think it would be wonderful to have that time and skill to learn what's going on properly.
Yeah, I wonder, Vikas, what would you to say to someone like Callum, who has come in relatively new?
Yes. First of all, I'm a very happy user of Obsidian. It's one of the examples I give always of very delightful software. I think the company that makes it feels very artisanal to me. They don't take venture capital investment, they're bootstrapped. They focus a lot on the craft. I follow the lead of that project on Twitter, and he's always posting about his baguette recipes. And I can see that craft in the product that I use. Listening to Callum, the first thought I had was one of the benefits of AI is it is opening up the craft of software to tens of millions more people who have great ideas. I mean, they say that there are maybe 15 million or so professional programmers out there. But I think there are another 30 to 40 million people with ideas and who are already doing some form of programming. Like, people don't think of Excel spreadsheets as programming, but it absolutely is. And the craft of what is good software, let's say, like an Obsidian plugin like this, those ideas can come from a much broader pool of people than the people who currently know how to write code. And I think opening up this craft to a broader base is good. It's also now possible for people to do, kind of achieve the actual dream of personal computing, in that you can write little agents and little things for yourself. When you can log all your recipes and tell ChatGPT that analyze this and give me something, and you can. I think there's a lot of potential in making that ancient 80s dream of personal computing actually come true now.
I wonder if that would also affect weaving, Daisy. Do you see, with the Jacquard loom, that AI could play a role?
Definitely. I think anything that empowers someone to be able to acquire more knowledge in a way that they can then tangibly use it is good. There's obviously the ethics around a lot of the AI tools and like the cost of that environmentally, but then that's a whole other conversation for another time, And so like I kind of get caught in that trade-off constantly. But that's just like my hand weaving roots, like the labor involved with these things and the real world cost. And so like sometimes I get caught up with kind of, whether we should perhaps be kind of having more considerations around what we want to spend that cost on. I think about just in terms of accessibility, like how I know folks who have various levels of neurodivergence that lean on a lot of these AI tools that help them gain more employment, are able to kind of produce more work and be able to kind of like empower them in the real world. So like, yeah, I think, but then I guess with weaving, definitely, for example, the jacquard recipe that we've been working on, there's a lot of kind of just background research from a lot of different people that have been going on. And there's definitely been times at which I've reached a chasm of knowledge and gone, I don't know what I'm doing here. And you kind of scour Google to the ends of the earth and get lost in the search pages and turn to asking, it's like another search engine. I kind of have been like leaning on it as if I kind of, like a research assistant. Because I think there's power in that, definitely, and reducing the amount of days and time that used to be spent on research to be able to immediately kind of get you further along the chain of kind of inquiry is very powerful, And so there's definitely applications, I think, in that space that, yeah, we'd love to play with more once we get our loom up and running.
Did anyone else have anything they wanted to contribute? Well, we're coming to the end. As part of the research that John, did you have something to? No.
Sorry, yeah, it's kind of a only vaguely formed thought, but I would just this triggered a conversation that I've had with Daisy a long time ago from our time studying weaving at RMIT, and how we've both kind of dealt with the higher ed space where they really discouraged us, Daisy as a student and me as a temporary teacher there, from integrating knowledge of the loom with the design, like the technical and the design were really discouraged from speaking to each other. And as a textile design teacher now in the TAFE course, I'm really seeing um, a decline in what students are kind of picking up from just defaulting to not just AI, but devices. I mean, their ability to operate a computer has been kind of seriously impaired. So yeah, I don't know. I really like that it's making knowledge so much more accessible, but I'm just wondering, like, yeah, the hand skills and even the computer skills, I'm just seeing a pretty serious decline.
Yes, well, in the research for this, I was looking around to see if there was something like a guild of programmers, because, in the history of craft, these associations have often brought people in solidarity to think about the common issues that they face, whether it's like the stealing of craft secrets or the lowering of standards in terms of what is a master and so on. And I found a couple of professional associations, but the only one that seemed to have a particular line was was actually IBM. They had a policy of humans in the loop, that in terms of software development, there needed to be some sort of oversight in terms of the way in which the code was being used, a bit like what Daisy was talking about with RoboDebt, that some sort of ethical engagement that is still necessary despite the extraordinary capacity that AI has to be able to develop code. But maybe from this, it's such a rich conversation. I hope that the Knowledge House for Craft might also be a space that we can continue this conversation, because it's certainly one that will evolve as AI continues to evolve, and the sort of critical issues that we've discussed, which is a legacy that we have really inherited from our ancestors, certainly back in the Industrial Revolution, this sort of critique of the machine, and but also the possibility that it leads to a discovery of what it is to be human when the machine takes over some of our functions, that this will be an evolving conversation. So thanks so much, Daisy and Vikas. Thanks, Kamya. Thanks, Callum, John, Blake, Ilka, Tony, Patricia, and everyone. And we'll find a way to put this into our vault, and hopefully it will also trigger future conversations like the one we had before with ChatGPT. So thanks very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Go well.
And I think there's a
yes.
great point in the chat. I just want everyone. I think that is very pertinent. I agree with. I think the comment is about designers sort of using craftspeople as their AI. I think there's a lot of truth in that. It comes down to power and who has the power and who uses it, right? But thank you so much for inviting. This was very enjoyable for me.
Good. Thank you very
Thank
much,
you, Kevin.
Anchal, for that final comment that gave us something to think about.
Blake.
Okay.